Once you get your audio into Audition, either by recording it or bringing in some files or both, it's time to do the obvious, right? Listen to it. So I'm going to talk about playback and monitoring in this tutorial. If you want to follow along, open up the 0501 Playing and Monitoring Multitrack session by going to the Working Files Multitrack Sessions folder and then opening up this guy right there. All right, you think that, well, playing is pretty obvious. Anybody who's worked with a VCR knows that you just press the play button and off you go. Now, right away, we're going to have some silence here at the beginning because there's nothing here at the beginning. So, rather than sit around and wait, I'm going to drag this little guy here. This is called the current time indicator. So you can drag this guy anywhere you want, at any speed you want. So I'll drag it toward the beginning here. And now I'll click the play button. And turn it off, I press the stop button. Obvious, right? But the keyboard shortcut for this is something you're going to use a lot more frequently than clicking on these little buttons down here. The keyboard shortcut to play or to stop play is the space bar. So here's the space bar and the space bar. Turning it on and turning it off. So the space bar is your favorite go-to keyboard shortcut to play or stop playback of anything, be it inside a multi-track session here or inside the waveform view or the spectral frequency display or the pitch display. We're working here in the multi-track session because I want to work on the waveform display in a separate tutorial when I talk about how to use the waveform display. All right, so let's move on to some other things here. We got all these transport controls down here. And what do they all mean? Well, if I click play, that's the pause button. So everything stays active, which is kind of interesting because down here in the levels meter, so-called VU or volume unit meter, it holds the most recent volume level of whatever was playing at that moment. So you can see and retain whatever the volume level was at that moment. You can see how loud things were at that moment. This little guy shows the peak volume level. So when you pause, it does keep this here. I'll unpause it by pressing this button again. Stop it again, and there's the changed view level. Also, the view levels show up here for each track. All right, let me just stop this now. What do the rest of these guys do? Well, fast forward. If I hold down fast forward, I have to hold it down to do that. If I click it just once, it just goes for a little click. So you have to hold it down to fast forward or rewind. It's kind of interesting behavior when you have play going. Gets to that high frequency thing, or it goes backwards. If it's in pause when you use fast forward, it doesn't make any sound when you go fast forward or backwards. It zips through like that. That's when you're in pause. Okay, I'll stop it again now. What are these guys here? These are called move playhead to previous and move playhead to next. Next what and previous what? Well, it means next or previous marker. Or if there are no markers, it's going to go to the home, the beginning, or the end over here. So I click on previous, it'll jump to the beginning. If I click on go to the next, it goes to the end. Now, we're not going to talk about markers as a tool to use or why you'd want to use them in this tutorial, but let me just add a couple of markers simply by moving the current time indicator and pressing the letter M on the keyboard, and that adds that marker. I'll add one more marker, pressing M again. So now when I press these guys, press the next one, it'll go to marker number 6 there it says, and I press it again, it goes to the end. Here we go again. So it's kind of a fast way to navigate. And the keyboard shortcut for these guys are Control right or left arrow on Windows and Command right or left arrow on a Mac. So Control right arrow, boom, boom, left arrow, boom, 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 like that. That's the keyboard shortcut to use these guys. This little guy here is called the loop playback. If you click that, then anytime you click play, it's going to want to play to the end and then start over again. Well, this piece right here is 3 minutes and 50 seconds long, as you can see down here by the duration. What's the purpose of looping that? So typically people loop something if they have a selection. Now we're talking about selections in a different tutorial, but let's make a little selection like that. And now with loop on, if I click play, it'll loop inside the selection.
Play by the rules, but it's just one thing that I really mind. Play by the rules.
So you can see how that works. I'll turn that off by just clicking away from it. I'm going to get rid of these markers by right-clicking and saying delete marker, right-click, delete marker. In addition to these transport controls down here, you can use your keyboard as a transport control device. J, K, and L are your transport controls. K stops whatever's going on at any particular moment. L goes forward, J goes backward. So you press L once, it plays.
No matter where I look.
K stops. Now if I press L twice or 3 times or 4 times, it gets faster each time, and it'll be kind of loud for you to talk on it. So I'll just do that. I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4.
You'll never ever.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, stop. I go backwards, same thing. And you can adjust those speeds inside Preferences. Edit, Preferences, Playback. And it says JK and L shuttle speed normal, which means that the first time you press L or J, it'll be normal speed. If you do double speed, the first time you press J or L, it'll be double speed, forward or backwards, and then half speed, you can figure that out. And then each subsequent thing, increases the speed in some fashion, but I set it to the default normal speed, so that the first time I press L, it's a normal speed. Now, as you play things, you can watch your time down here in the bottom. This is the current time indicator's location. That's in minutes and seconds and thousandths of a second. You can type in a time or scrub through it. Now notice when I hover my cursor over here, it turns into a little scrubby, they call it, where you've got a little double arrow coming out of a hand with an index finger pointed out. If I drag here, it'll scrub through time. I can watch my time down here as the current time indicator moves. Or I can type here again to highlight it and put in a time that I want. So I can put in, let's say, 2 minutes. So 2:00, and then .000. That should take me to 2 minutes. There we go. And it puts the current time indicator right there on 2 minutes. If I right-click up here in the time ruler, that can change the time display from what's called decimal, which is what we're using right now, minutes, seconds, and thousandths of a second. Or I can use any one of these what are called SMPTE time codes, which are used when you're working with video, depending on the standard that you're using, be it NTSC or PAL or some other standard. Then you can also switch to samples, which is kind of interesting because samples are, they're 48,000 samples per second here. And so you see samples in terms of thousands and millions. And when you go look at your time over here for a clip, it too changes to samples. So you can kind of have some kind of coordination between the two. I'm going to go back to decimal because that's kind of the standard one. That's one I'm most comfortable working with. So just a couple more things before I wrap up. I have not discussed these buttons down here at the bottom. I'm going to talk about them when we work on multi-track sessions. And a couple more keyboard shortcuts. The home key takes you to the beginning of the timeline, and the end key takes you to the end of the timeline. Up here you can see it's the end of the timeline, not the end of the clips. That's kind of confusing sometimes. To get to the end of the clips, you use the Control or the Command left or right arrow keyboard shortcuts. There's the end, again, left and right here to get to the end of the clips as opposed to pressing the N key to get to the end of the timeline. And that wraps up our discussion of playing and monitoring audio inside Audition.